You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. My co-host today is Cindy Johnson, copy editor for the U.S. Lighthouse Society and award-winning volunteer for Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses. Hi, Cindy.
Hi, Jeremy.
Today is February 20th, 2022, and this is episode 161 of Lighthearted. In a few minutes, we're going to hear about the history and preservation of Bolivar Point Lighthouse near Galveston, Texas. And later we'll have another Be a Lighthouse segment. How's your winter going, Cindy?
Well, it's pretty mild here, I have to say, at my mom's in Tucson. It usually, yes, it actually gets down into the 30s overnight most nights, but it's actually 60s or so during the day. So I really can't complain about the winter here. And also a pair of great horned owls just started nesting right by us. So that's really neat.
That is really cool.
But my mom said they come back every year around this time to nest and have their little owlets and do their thing. Pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Wildlife-wise, we've had bobcats around here recently on the Hampshire Seacoast. There's a lot of sightings of those. Charlotte, my wife, saw one near our home not too long ago.
Oh, wow.
And weather-wise, it's been up and down winter here. It's like it's 50 or 55 one day and 5 the next.
Ooh, yikes.
You know how typical New England winters are. But we're only a month from the official first day of spring. Mm-hmm. I'm looking forward to a busy season of lighthouse visits and events. So, Cindy, has anything interesting happened on this day in lighthouse history?
Well, yes, as a matter of fact. Half Moon Reef Light was one of the many Screwpile-type lighthouses built on the Texas Gulf Coast. During the Civil War, the Confederates darkened its light to aid the escape of Southern blockade runners. The light was relit on February 20th, 1868. In 1978, the lighthouse was given to the Calhoun County Historic Commission, and it was transported to a new location in Port Lavaca. Of more than 100 Screwpile lighthouses that were built in the 19th century, Half Moon Reef is one of only a few that survive, and the only one on the Gulf Coast.
For listeners who might not be familiar with them, Screwpile lighthouses originated in England in the 1830s. The foundations stood on iron pilings which were twisted or screwed into the seabed. The first Screwpile lighthouse in the U.S. was Brandywine Shoal Light in the Delaware Bay, which was built in 1850. The only one that survives in its original location is Thomas Point Shoal Light in the Chesapeake Bay, which we featured on this podcast a couple of times. Mm-hmm. Cindy, please help me tell our listeners about Bolivar Point Lighthouse and today's guests.
Sure, Jeremy. The port of Galveston, Texas, which was established in 1825, eventually became the busiest port on the Gulf Coast and the second busiest in the country after New York City. Bolivar Point is at the southwestern end of the Bolivar Peninsula, marking the east side of the entrance to Galveston Bay. The first lighthouse on the point began service in late 1852.
The 65-foot-tall cast-iron tower was dismantled during the Civil War, leading to the building of a temporary wooden tower in 1865. In 1870, Congress appropriated funds for a new cast-iron lighthouse. The model for the rebuilding of the lighthouse tower and keeper's house was Louisiana's Pass Aloutre light station, which had a tall 117-foot tower and a wooden keeper's house.
The third-order Fresnel lens was first illuminated in the rebuilt Bolivar Point Lighthouse on November 19, 1872. The light station weathered devastating hurricanes in 1900 and 1915. Following the destruction of the 1915 storm, 2 new dwellings were built for the keepers and their families. The houses were built on iron pilings to keep them above any future storm surge.
With an increase in the intensity of Galveston Jetty Lighthouse in 1930, Bolivar Lighthouse was considered expendable. The light was extinguished in May 1930. The property was transferred to the War Department. Then in 1947, the War Assets Administration sold the property for $5,500 to rancher E.V. Boyt.
In 2015, descendants of the first private owners of the light station property created the nonprofit Bolivar Point Lighthouse Foundation to address the restoration and preservation of the lighthouse and to make it open and available to the public. Amy Maxwell Chase is the executive director of the Bolivar Point Lighthouse Foundation, and Mark Boyt is a founder and board member of the organization.
Both Amy and Mark are descended from the original owners of the light station. I had the pleasure of speaking with them recently via Zoom. Let's listen to that conversation now. I'm speaking today with Amy Maxwell Chase and Mark Boyt of the Bolivar Point Lighthouse Foundation in Texas. Thank you so much for joining me today, Amy and Mark. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
So, Amy and Mark, I, of course, want to talk about your long family association with the lighthouse. We'll get into some history of the lighthouse itself also and about its preservation. But let's start by talking about your family history. How did each of you, and you can decide which one of you wants to go first here, but how did you become involved with the lighthouse?
Well, Jeremy, Amy and I are both the grandchildren of the original private owners. My grandfather, E.V. Boyt, acquired the lighthouse property in a public auction in 1947 from the United States government. And his brother-in-law, George Maxwell, wanted the other half. So they split it up at that time. And we've been joint owners. The families have been joint owners of the lighthouse ever since.
Amy, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'm just blessed that my papaw and mamaw shared this property. It's been in our family, like Mark said, since 1947, and it's been a blessing for us to be able to grow up down there and experience all that she has to offer.
So we'll get back to that in a while, maybe talk a bit more about your personal associations with the lighthouse. But let's talk about the history of the site, of the light station, Bolivar Point Lighthouse. The original lighthouse was established on the point in 1852. Why was a lighthouse needed there in the first place?
Well, Texas was a new entrance into the United States of America. Galveston is a major harbor and probably the largest port west of New Orleans in the Gulf. The Bolivar Point light, when combined with a light on the tip of Galveston Island, creates a range marker for the ships coming in. They line the two lights up to hit the entrance of the channel.
And the first lighthouse, the 1852 lighthouse, didn't last long. The Civil War got in the way. What happened in the Civil War there?
Well, the story goes is that the materials were needed for the war effort, for the Confederate States war effort. So it was deconstructed to not allow the Union to have it as an observation post and to, for the materials. Iron was in short supply.
You had the Confederate lighthouse service for a few years there that ironically dismantled some lighthouses and hid some of the Fresnel lenses and so forth. So there was a temporary tower for a while following the Civil War.
Well,
the present lighthouse was built in 1872, right? And what are some of the interesting things about the lighthouse tower itself?
The current tower built in 1872, which was really shortly after the Civil War. So this is the federal government once again, committing real dollars to the southern states in reconstruction. It's, much taller than the original tower. It's 117 feet at the lens level. The spire and the very top would be a little higher. It can be seen quite a ways offshore. And, as a day mark or at night, you line the Bolivar Lighthouse up with the end of the Galveston Island and you hit the entrance to the channel. So the coast of Texas, when seen from offshore, is incredibly uniform. It all looks the same. And that's why so many of the early explorers got lost looking for the Mississippi River, because from seaward, there's no distinguishing landmarks. Mm-hmm. And so a tall tower used as a day mark or as a lighthouse is very effective in helping the mariners get into the channels.
It's a very tall cast iron lighthouse, as you said, 117 feet. I think it's one of the tallest cast iron lighthouse towers around. Let's talk about the history of the storms there, which has played a big role in the history of that place. There were especially two major hurricanes, 1900 and 1915. The Galveston Hurricane of 1900. I'm sure a lot of our listeners are familiar with it, one of the most famous or infamous storms in American history. What happens at Bolivar Point Light Station during the Galveston Hurricane in 1900?
Well, it's well documented, and there's great books on the Galveston 1900 hurricane. It's the worst natural disaster in United States history. Over 6,000 people died as a result of the storm, and Bolivar was not spared. It was there in the brunt of it. The surge flowed over the peninsula, and it reached about 6 feet deep inside the lighthouse. The keepers, their families, a number of local residents, and then a group of people from a passing passenger train all sought refuge in the tower and rode out the storm. A terrible day and night riding the storm out. And the folks on the train, a good number of them decided not to get in the lighthouse and rode the train back to Beaumont, and they never made it. It's the worst rail disaster in United States history. Also occurred at the same time right there. I mean, it's a terrible story. A lot of people were trying to get to the lighthouse and couldn't get in. They found several bodies in the yard the next day. And then 1915, you have a repeat. The storm was just as bad, but Galveston had built a seawall. So there was not a lot of loss of life in Galveston Island proper.
Yeah.
But in Bolivar, it was just as bad. The keepers' houses were destroyed. The oil house was destroyed. A number of local people sought refuge in the tower once again. I think even more people were in the tower in 1915 because there had been a shrimp canning factory built in Bolivar, and those families came to the lighthouse. So a large number of people. The head keeper for both storms was a man named H.C. Claiborne. Wow. And he was just legendary in the lighthouse service as being one of the best keepers. And the Coast Guard has named a large buoy tender after him that is now part of the Coast Guard station in Galveston. Mm-hmm. So it's a good tribute to the lighthouse service and Mr. Claiborne and what they did during those storms. There was an assistant keeper in 1915 named J.P. Brooks, who turned the light by hand when the movement of the top of the tower got violent and they couldn't use the wind-up mechanism. And his grandson is a singer-songwriter out of Dallas, also named Justin P. Brooks. And he's written an incredible song about the 1915 hurricane. I'd encourage folks to look up Justin Brooks' hurricane song. It's really good. Called Candle by the Shore.
Okay.
We would love to have him and his current band come for some fundraisers in the future.
Yeah, I hope so. That sounds great. So moving ahead in history a little bit, can you tell me about the accidental shelling of the light station in 1917?
Yeah, 1917. So the Coast Guard was in the process of building new residences for the keeper and the assistant families. And the Army in Galveston, there was a fort on the east end of Galveston Island, and they accidentally shelled the light station with practice rounds. Thank goodness they weren't explosive rounds. One landed in the yard and one landed in the tower. It pierced the tower about 20 feet up on one of the plates, and you can see the patch on the inside where they patched it. But it shook them up pretty good because there was no way to call them off. There was no way to contact the fort in Galveston at that time, tell them to hold their fire. Wow. That could have been pretty bad.
Wow, that poor light station has been assaulted by nature and by humans. To be pretty frightening for all those.
Have you ever run across another instance of the government shelling a lighthouse?
Yes, just one. Actually, my good friend Simon Ponsart Roberts, who grew up at lighthouses in Massachusetts, when she was a little girl, she was at Cuttyhunk Island off Cape Cod at the lighthouse there. Her father was the keeper, and they were having a birthday party out in the yard for, I think it was a cousin of hers. And the military, this was in the 40s during World War II. And the military, the Navy, I believe it was actually, was doing bombing practice. They were supposed to be dropping the bombs on a place called No Man's Island near there, a deserted island near there. But somehow they got confused and they dropped the bombs on the wrong island. And they were coming down in the yard by the lighthouse, and this poor family had to scatter and run into the house. And none of them exploded on impact, and luckily nobody was hurt. But she posed next to a bomb on the dock near the lighthouse, and shortly after that, the military called and said, "Don't touch those bombs." And they came and picked them all up. Turned out they were live after all. It's so lucky that none of them exploded.
They got lucky both times.
Absolutely. So before we move on, is there anything else that stands out for you related to the keepers and families who lived there over the years?
One of the assistant keepers in 1918, wife and infant daughter died of this influenza epidemic, and they're buried on the grounds somewhere, and we don't really know where they're buried. It's just supposedly near the lighthouse. That's as much as we know about it.
The light was deactivated in 1933, if I have that right. Why was the light deactivated at that time?
Well, budget problems during the Great Depression. It was deemed unnecessary because of another light that was, on the South Jetty. But the maritime interest in Galveston really fought it. And, Amy's done some research that, their local folks got really upset when they were going to put the lighthouse out. And they stalled it for a couple of years. But then ultimately it was in the cards that the Coast Guard was going to shut it down. And so in 1933, it was deactivated. The property was turned over to the War Department, and they housed Army families here from the local fort. There's another Army fort, coastal artillery battery on the Bolivar side, and some of those families lived here. The Coast Guard did operate a navigational beacon until 1956. Electronic navigation aid was operated from the yard, but the lighthouse lens and the mechanism and all that got crated up and sent off to a federal warehouse.
Before we move on to more modern history, there's one other historic event in 1947. Can you tell me about the Texas City blast? What was that?
Yeah, so the Texas City blast occurred just a few months prior to our families acquiring the property. Same year, there was a ship docked in the docks at Texas City, which is directly across the bay from us, that had a cargo of ammonium nitrate, among other things, and a fire broke out. And as they were fighting the fire, they didn't know what the cargo was, and it all exploded, much like the warehouses in Beirut that blew up a couple of years ago. Devastating explosion. It's the worst industrial accident in United States history. 581 dead, including 113 missing and 63 unidentified. Those people were just blown up completely. 1,700 people were hospitalized. 2,000 people were made homeless. And there were actually two ships that blew up. There was the first explosion, and then several hours later, there was a second explosion. One of the anchors was blown a half a mile from where the ship was. So brutal explosion, and it damaged the masonry in the lighthouse. It shook a big hole near the base inside the tower, and then all the glass that was remaining was gone in the houses and the lighthouse. If there was glass remaining in the lighthouse, it was gone after that explosion.
Sounds comparable to an atomic blast.
Well, people remember what happened in Beirut just a couple of years ago, and so it would have been real similar to that.
This is for both of you. I'd like to get back to your personal associations with the lighthouse. I'm wondering if both of you spent a lot of time at the light station when you were growing up.
Yes, Jeremy. So my family, we did spend a lot of time growing up at the lighthouse. One of my favorite pictures is my aunt and two cousins and myself. And I'm like a little onesie, so itty bitty, and on the front porch of the beach house. So we've spent, countless summers and holidays and birthdays. And my dad and his brothers were huge fishermen. So many times down there fishing over the summers. So we spent a lot of time. It's been a very special family home to us, and it's been great to be very much of a blessing to be able to grow up down there.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you have a lot of great memories. Same with you, Mark?
Yeah, it was, it's a second home, and Amy and I both, we grew up just an hour car ride away from the lighthouse, so it was easy to get to, and we would spend big chunks of the summer down there. Just great as a little kid, growing up and going to the beach and fishing. And, my dad would even come down after work and meet us on the beach. And so we could do a lot of time down here. One thing about the old house, though, my grandma was convinced that because it was at the beach, it didn't need air conditioning.
No.
And so our house didn't get air conditioning until 1980.
Wow. Yeah. Did it have a nice sea breeze, or did it get really hot in there sometimes?
Not in July and August.
Yeah.
June's pretty good. June's fine, but
yeah,
you get to July 4th and it's all bets are off.
Well, I understand. Even here on the New Hampshire seacoast in the summer in July and August, it can be so hot. And I know that sometimes even right by the ocean, it's completely still. You don't always get that breeze.
Yeah, that's the downside is when the wind dies.
Yeah. My next question, either or both of you can answer this, but I understand a movie was shot there, largely right at and around the lighthouse. My Sweet Charlie. 1968. Could you tell me about that?
Yeah, I think it was 1970. And I'll talk about it because I'm older than Amy, and I actually remember coming to see the movie set. They were filming during the winter, and Patty Duke and Ed Freeman Jr. were the stars. And it's an interesting story that is, I think, important for today's audiences. So if someone would like to look it up and see a movie filmed at the Lighthouse, My Sweet Charlie, it's an interesting message. It's great. It was way ahead of its time. Mm-hmm. Patty Duke was this fabulous role. And Ed Freeman Jr., he wound up playing a lot of different characters throughout his career later on, too. He was actually Elijah Muhammad in the Spike Lee Malcolm X movie with Denzel Washington.
Yep.
That was one of his last roles, but great movie. And it kind of shows the house that I grew up in. And that's what I like about it, is because it looks the way my grandparents set it up. Mm-hmm. That's what the house looked like back then. They had done a lot of updating the house, but now the Maxwell's house and our house both, I think, look a lot more original than they used to. So we've done a lot of work on these houses, and they just look fantastic. On the inside, at least. Yeah,
I said 1968 for the movie. You said 1970. I just looked it up on the Internet Movie Database. It did come out in 1970.
I was real little, but I remember coming down, and my dad had to meet with him for something. So he brought me for some reason.
Yeah. Did you see actual filming with the stars?
No. It was brutally cold, and it was wet, and they had all this equipment in the yard, and we were just, I don't even know why they needed us there, but my dad was talking to him about something.
Yeah. How about you, Amy? Do you have any memories of that movie?
I was only 4 years old when it was being filmed, Jeremy. So I was a little young, but I've definitely seen it. And to Mark's point, it would be a great movie to be seen at this point.
Yeah. That sounds really interesting. I don't know if it's available. You don't happen to know, do you? If it's available.
It's chopped up on YouTube, and it's 10 episodes on YouTube. You can watch 90% of it.
Okay. Sounds like a lot of work, but it might be worth the effort.
Unfortunately, I'm really good at YouTube.
Okay. Yeah. You mentioned the Fresnel lens earlier, third order Fresnel lens that was in the lighthouse. Can you remind me, when was that removed? And I understand it has a place of honor at the Smithsonian's Museum of American History.
Yes, it does, Jeremy. It was removed in 1933. And this is actually the third of the lenses that was in the Bolivar Lighthouse. And this one was installed in 1907. So speaking to Mark's point, this was the one that J.P. Brooks, that he turned by hand in the 1915 storm. And this light could be seen from 17 miles away. And if you go to the Smithsonian, she's a sight to see. I took my twin daughters back in October for the first time for them to see it. And she's located in the National Museum of American History. Mm-hmm. She measures 64 inches by 48 inches, and she's in a beautiful glass beehive shape. Yeah. So for anybody that goes to Smithsonian, please stop by the National Museum of American History and see her.
Yeah, it's been quite a while since I've been there, and I don't think that was on display there when I was there in the 90s last time. So I need to get back to see that display. But the Fresnel lenses are the jewels of the lighthouses, and it's a lot of them, as you probably know, were destroyed. Fairly small percentage are still in the lighthouses, and some are in museums, and I'm really glad that one was saved. Let's talk about the more recent history of your efforts to preserve the place. First of all, what exactly led to the formation of the Bolivar Point Lighthouse Foundation? I know, again, the lighthouse was in your family's in private ownership for quite a few years, but then the foundation was formed as a nonprofit in 2015. Why was that done?
So after Hurricane Ike, we had further deterioration of the cupola and pieces of cast iron that were falling. And so my cousin, Michael Maxwell, Mark, they started the foundation, as you mentioned, in 2015, so that we could address the restoration and preservation of the lighthouse. So this nonprofit, it's a 501c3, and I'm thankful to our cousins, Michael and Mark, that they got this foundation rolling in 2015 for us to be able to preserve and restore the lighthouse.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great thing. And I believe you had one, or maybe it's more than one, condition assessments done. Is that right?
We have. So on June 25th in 2018, the foundation contracted Hudson Gallagher and Sparks Engineering to conduct a conditions assessment of the lighthouse to prioritize and provide an estimate for repairs and research and restoration. And that was estimated at $2.5 million back in 2018. We recently have had, we're working on a master plan and currently working on another conditions assessment with Architectus and Larry Ersick, a great historical architect. We definitely have the same problems, further deterioration. And we have a very rough estimate right now of about $3.5 million that we're at this point.
What is the number one aspect that needs to be addressed probably before anything else?
We need to remove the top and fabricate a new replacement. Mm-hmm. So in terms of just restoration, the dome, the cupola, it's definitely at risk. It was recommended that it be removed as soon as possible. So that is definitely our most critical piece that needs to be addressed in this restoration effort, is the top.
Yeah, and we're talking about not just the dome or cupola at the very top, but the entire lantern level of the lighthouse, basically where the light is, what would be called the lantern gallery, the deck around it.
The watch room down to the gallery deck.
Okay.
All that's going to have to come off.
Yeah, and be refabricated. And are there any plans to do something with the old parts that are removed?
Yeah, absolutely. It would look great as a static display on the ground. We can kind of piece it back together.
Yeah.
We'd love to have it in like a visitor center.
Yeah.
Where the public could access and see the original, like Mark said, watch room and lantern.
What are the ultimate plans for the light station when restoration is completed? What are you aiming towards with this restoration?
Well, Jeremy, for the first time, when the restoration is complete, we would like to open the lighthouse to the public for the very first time in the history. So, obviously it'd be under, controlled access, certain days, certain times, but we absolutely want to open her up to the public and share her. And we'd love to have an educational curriculum where children could learn more. There's so much history there. Jane Long, the mother of Texas, was there. In addition, just to all the robust history of the storms, the lighthouse keepers and the tower. We'd love to have an educational curriculum. We'd love to have a visitor center where tourists could come, and see and just experience and really just understand this robust history of the Bolivar Lighthouse.
Having it open to the public for the first time in its history would be incredibly meaningful for a lot of longtime Southeast Texas residents who just love this lighthouse.
Oh, it sounds fantastic. If I could, I'd buy my ticket right now. So I have a two-part question for either or both of you. Have you had problems with major storms there in recent years? You talked about the historic hurricanes. And part two of that question is the lighthouse threatened at all by any kind of erosion or flooding that occurs there?
Well, yeah, so I'll take this one. Hurricane Ike in 2008 brought a storm surge that was equivalent to 1915 or 1900. It was 8 feet of water under our houses, probably about 6 feet in the lighthouse itself. Massive surge. It destroyed thousands of houses on the Bolivar Peninsula and really changed the peninsula. I mean, it took a good 2 to 3 years to get back to near normal, probably much like what South Louisiana, Lake Charles area, Cameron dealing with now from their storms. But it's going to be continuously threatened by hurricanes. We had a high tide from Tropical Storm Beta last year that flooded the entire yard, and it had water up to the doorstep of the lighthouse. Mm-hmm. And that was just a tropical storm. High winds. We're constantly afraid of something catastrophic happening to the top of the lighthouse.
Yeah.
If we don't get the top removed and a steel deck put down to hold it in while we do the fundraising for restoration, something catastrophic could happen. And that's a worst case scenario for us.
Right. It would have to be sealed as quickly as possible. Something like that happened. Because
it'll need a temporary steel deck as soon as the top comes off. Yeah.
Yeah. But hopefully can get the top replaced before anything like that happens. So historically, the lighthouse had black and white horizontal bands. I assume that same color scheme will be retained. Is that right?
Absolutely. That is our absolute hope. That is exactly what we'd like to do. Is we would like to take the tower back to her original beauty 150 years ago of the black and white horizontal band. So that is absolutely our goal.
Good. Always best to keep them looking as they did historically. So let's talk about fundraising. How are you raising funds for restoration?
So we're in the process of applying and pursuing grant money. We're definitely going to be hosting some upcoming fundraisers on Bolivar Peninsula, Galveston, and the surrounding areas. We have a website that you can go to today and make a contribution. And our website is www.bolivarpointlighthouse.org. Mm-hmm. So you could definitely go to our website and make a donation. And additionally, we are going to have a lighthouse passport stamp, which we are super excited about. We'll soon have this official, again, Bolivar Point Lighthouse stamp. We saw the prototype last week and are so excited that we'll be included in this program. Since the lighthouse, unfortunately, is not open to the public at this point, we will be going to the website, USLHS, and speaking how this will be made available, that you can get the stamp until we're in a place where the tower is safe and secure and we can open to the public and readily stamp passports. But we're super excited to have that.
Yeah. Well, it ties it in nicely to the U.S. Lighthouse Society. I'm really glad to hear you're getting an official passport stamp. And probably some U.S. Lighthouse Society tours will be visiting you in the future as well, I think, right?
We do. We have actually one Easter Sunday, 10:30 in the morning. There's a tour of 27 from the USLHS that will be coming. So we're excited to host them, and we'll be officially stamping their passports. So we're excited.
Yeah, that is really exciting. I know that people are going to love it. I wish I was part of that tour. I'm supposed to go on an Ireland tour this summer, but I'm not going on the tour, unfortunately, to Texas. I would love to, and I will see you there sometime, I promise. So if you mentioned the website, bolivarpointlighthouse.org. Let me ask you, you said people can donate through the website, right? There's a mechanism on there for them to donate. Is that right?
Correct, there is.
Do you need volunteers for anything at this point?
We do. We would love, there's a place on our website where we would love to have people sign up for volunteers. We're going to have a host of committees that we're starting to work on and how they can assist with fundraising and efforts. So we definitely will need volunteers. We'd also love people to share, go onto our Facebook page, share our Facebook page, and, also going back to our website, share our website. We just definitely want to get the word out about the foundation, our nonprofit, and what we're doing to restore this special piece of Texas history.
Yeah. So the Facebook page is Bolivar Point Lighthouse on Facebook. Yes. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. And you'll see our official nonprofit logo. So you'll know it's the official nonprofit page, correct?
Right.
For the Bolivar Point Lighthouse.
Right. Okay. So for now, if people, before the place is restored and opened up for tours, if people want to visit there and just get a good look at the lighthouse, get some photos, what do you recommend to them?
Absolutely. There's a couple of great places that they can take wonderful photos of the lighthouse. One is in front of Highway 87, on Highway 87, in front of the lighthouse. The end of Everett Road, right there at the back gate, is a great place to take photos. Another lovely spot is Frenchtown Road. And a wonderful place of beautiful pictures would be from Fort Travis. So there are a couple of places that you can get some magnificent photos of the lighthouse and the property.
Good. How has the local community there around Point Bolivar Point, I should say, how has the local community responded to the idea of restoring the lighthouse?
I will tell you, extreme excitement. Seeing the lighthouse restored is something everyone wants to see. Since I stepped in the role in July, I've been planning myself in the community and getting to know everyone on Bolivar Peninsula and Galveston and the region, and even the local county and state officials. It's been really exciting just to see the passion. Everyone is thrilled that we're doing this and they're ready to see it happen. So there's a lot of excitement, Jeremy, that we're taking on this project and the endeavor ahead.
Well, I think people everywhere see lighthouses as kind of a focal point of the communities. I'm sure it means a lot to the people around there.
It is a very recognizable landmark for anyone who's traveled between Galveston and Beaumont.
I'm sure, and recognizable landmark partly because it's so tall. You must be able to see it for miles. I have one more question for you. Okay, this is for both of you. You can fight amongst yourselves as far as who's going to take it first, but this one's for bonus points. Okay, what has been your favorite part personally of your involvement? And that is this involvement in your cases really has been for your whole lifetimes. What's been your favorite part of your involvement with Bolivar Point Lighthouse?
Just meeting so many incredible people of Bolivar and Galveston and the region, and they all have a story. Whether it's my great uncle was on that train in the storm of 1900 and he got off and he walked 2 miles and he survived that storm, or someone else that we've heard, their great grandmother, she was 3 years old when they swam her in, she survived the storm of 1900 taking shelter in the lighthouse. Or people that have come up and said, my dad used to ride his bicycle onto the ferry boat and come over there. There's just, everyone has a story, and it's just everyone, there's such a love for it, because it's the first thing you see when you come on the peninsula. It's the last thing you're seeing as you're getting on the ferry boat to go back home. Mm-hmm. It's been incredible to hear so many wonderful stories, personal stories, and what it means to them. In addition, I'll say, just in doing this, the 3D Matterport scan is on our website, and that's for anybody that wants to go and take a virtual tour to take it to the top. That's just been an incredible thing that it's on our website to see. And then again, having this Lighthouse passport stamp and being a part of US LHS has just been some of the best parts about coming into this position, and as we've come so far. So,
well, that's great. I'm glad you mentioned the virtual tour. People should check that out at bolivarpointlighthouse.org. They can actually you actually can walk up the stairs in the lighthouse as part of the tour, right?
Absolutely.
Really cool. It was really, really nicely done. So, Mark, how about you? Your favorite part or parts of your involvement with the lighthouse?
It's been a real transformation of what I believed is possible for the lighthouse. Growing up here, it was just a static, stable thing. It was never going to go anywhere. And as time marches on, that is just not the case. And if we don't do something, it's not always going to be here. And that would be a tragedy. Amy's first cousin, my second cousin, Mike Maxwell, came to me and said that they were ready to get something going. I was all on board because, Mike had the idea to make this nonprofit start, and, it's incredibly important. If we don't do it, no one's going to do it. Failure is not an option, but we need lots of help. And, to think that we can get this thing restored to the point where it has glass in it, it's painted, it's safe, people can go up in it, that's incredible. And it's something I never would have thought possible 20 years ago. I would not have think that would have ever been possible. And now we're looking at the plan to make it happen.
Sounds good to me. And, somebody, some wise person said, where there's a will, there's a way. And you've certainly got the will. There's no doubt about that. And I, being representing the U.S. Lighthouse Society in this case, I'll certainly say that we'll do what we can to help publicize your efforts with this podcast and beyond. So it's a great project. I'm so glad you're looking forward to the future with plans to restore the light station and to improve public access. It's also important. And I thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I know our listeners will be rooting for you to complete restoration. Lots of us are looking forward to visiting in the future with U.S. Lighthouse Society tours or on our own. Really looking forward to it. Thank you so much, Amy and Mark. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Again, go to bolivarpointlighthouse.org to learn more about the Bolivar Point Lighthouse Foundation. You can make a donation or buy a t-shirt with their logo to help them with their efforts.
I'm always so happy when private owners of lighthouses work to make these places accessible to the public. It's not something they have to do. I really enjoyed speaking with Amy and Mark. I wish them all the best. Next, we're going to have a Be a Lighthouse segment. Lighthouses were built to save lives and property, which is also something that first responders in our communities do every day. In a sense, our firefighters, police, Coast Guard, and other first responders are serving as lighthouses to keep us safe.
On Tuesday, February 1st, first responders rescued 3 fishermen after their fishing boat sank off Scituate, Massachusetts. Shortly after 2:30 that afternoon, a local woman called 911 and reported seeing a fishing boat overturn and sink with black smoke filling the air. She saw that the 3 fishermen were clinging to debris to stay afloat. The water was 42 degrees and the men were in the water for 45 minutes.
I want to thank our listener Ben Thompson for suggesting the story for this segment. I spoke with Scituate Fire Chief John Murphy about the rescue. Let's listen to that now. I'm speaking this morning with Scituate Fire Chief John Murphy, and this is for one of our Be a Lighthouse segments. And certainly firefighters, first responders of all kinds, police, our lighthouses in our communities. I can't say enough about the work you guys do every day, but we're going to talk about a specific thing that happened a couple of days ago. But first, let me just thank you for being with me today, Chief Murphy. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy.
I understand it's been a busy season for you. You've been involved in a few rescues in the water.
Yeah, that's correct, Jeremy. Starting back since last June, we've had 4 marine emergencies that we were called to for those in peril at sea. Unfortunately, the first 2 resulted in 1 death in each incident. We had a woman who fell off a boat in heavy seas in our North River, and the second one involved someone jumping off a bridge that apparently wasn't a great swimmer. Water was cold, and he had drowned as well. So 2 drownings is very sad to see in 1 year, and they were only a couple of months apart. And then in September, some severe thunderstorms came through with a couple of paddleboarders outside the harbor along the coast, about a half mile out. And fortunately, that was a good outcome. They were basically one paddleboarder had her cell phone. We tracked her cell phone with GPS and a 911 system. Torrential rain, lightning, thunder, winds, the whole gamut. And then we had the second paddleboarder. She didn't know where she was. Her paddleboard went by her. We thought the worst. And eventually someone from the shore heard someone yelling. But long story short, this woman clinged on to a lobster pot, able to hold on long enough for us to get to her. Between the Scituate Police Department boat, Scituate Fire, and the Harbor Master have a combination boat, and and we were out there for those 2 rescues, and they were brought back. But those first incidents, all 4 people, no one was wearing life jackets. The safety equipment we have is there for a reason, and especially when the water's colder. And after those incidents, it's been really quiet, and until this past Tuesday afternoon, we were called for a possible boat sinking. There was a woman who called it in. The only call, which is surprising, apparently a 55-foot fishing vessel out of Gloucester had 3 fishermen on it. We got a 911 call at 2:35 in the afternoon that there was a possible boat sinking. So we dispatched our fire harbor master boat, the Scituate police boat, and also the Marshfield, the town south of us. Their harbor master was en route. We all got to the scene within a minute or so of each other. So upon our arrival, I was on the white boat, the Harbor Master fireboat. Didn't see anything until we got about 200 yards away, Jeremy, and we saw something black in the water that looked like hose. So as we got closer, we did see this debris, and one fisherman raised his hand. He needed help. So there was a sinking. There was some debris here. He was clinging on for life, and as we got closer, we actually found the other 2 fishermen clinging on for their life as well. The water's about 42 degrees. The seas are about 4 to 6 foot seas. And the diesel fuel, the boat sank right under them. So the diesel fuel was percolating above them. So it made it for a tough environment for these guys to survive. I don't know how they did it.
Yeah.
45 minutes with diesel fuel all around them, heavy seas and cold water. So we executed our operations, trying to get throw bags close to them. The Marshfield Harbor Master attempted 3 times. These guys were so cold, they really wouldn't let go of the flotation. They were that cold that they really couldn't self-rescue at all. So able to get fairly close to the first fisherman. We got him on board the white Harbor Master fireboat. These guys were all big gentlemen. They were all at least 250 to 300 pounds. So very challenging getting in the boat under these conditions. And we got the first victim in, the first fisherman, and then we were backed up close again to the second fisherman. We got him in the back door. We got him in, and then the third victim, as we were going over to the last fisherman, the Scituate police boat was able to pull up and get close to him. They eventually got him on board. We stood by till everybody was loaded on the boats. We moved into inside of the boat, started dressing them down, got them some blankets and some jackets, and it was about a 25-minute ride back to our beacon of hope, our Scituate Lighthouse. And as we approached the harbor, we called for 3 ambulances to be on standby. We got them on the ambulances. They got transported to the South Shore Hospital, and they've all been released. They were treated for a couple of days and doing well. So a lot of things lined up in their favor for this to be a rescue and not a recovery.
Absolutely. That's amazing. 42-degree water. It is incredible that they survived that with no survival suits again, or life jackets or anything. That's especially phenomenal. So another reminder of how important life jackets are, obviously.
Yeah, we agree. The no life jackets, obviously something happened fast. And that they were dragging for clams, big hose down there, which agitates the sand and gets the clams loose, and then there's a rake behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So they had a beam C, and I believe they were towing from the starboard side, and so I think they were just sort of leaning that way. And at the same time, bad luck happens that rake caught up on something in the bottom and just pulled that boat down quick. I guess it went down in 30 seconds, according to the witness who put it in. So fishermen said they were just thrown to the water right away. So something extremely fast. And the boats, actually, we went out the day after to survey the boat with commercial divers that were hired to go down. The boat is sitting on the bottom straight up. The outriggers actually come above the water at low tide. So still leaking a lot of fuel. Actually, it was leaking a lot of fuel. We went out there and the divers actually basically booked up they clogged up all the scuppers and the fuel fills and all that so we can minimize the fuel leakage. But we probably lost about 1,000 gallons of fuel. Hopefully, most of it's going to dissipate, but there were some estuaries nearby that were likely affected. We had DEP on our boat. We surveyed the whole area and by drone and also by boat. And from what I've heard, next week they're going to start salvage operations depending on the weather, probably Monday or Tuesday.
And again, this was called in by a local woman, right, who actually saw the men in trouble.
Correct. It's part of Scituate Peninsula, and right behind it, the next field over is Marshall over the bridge, and she must have had a home right there in the hill that she could oversee the ocean, and she had saw this boat going back and forth several times, fishing throughout the day. They were going back and forth parallel to the beach. Again, when we found the boat, it's about 3/4 of a mile off the beach. So she actually see it, and then all of a sudden she saw something going wrong, a puff of smoke, which we would assume the exhaust going in the water. She had thought, it must have been called in already, but I'm going to call in anyway. And fortunately she did, because she was the only caller, which is sort of crazy, but part of the lesson is too, if you see something out there that doesn't look right, let us know. Call 911, let us know. We'll investigate. If it's nothing, we all go home. But something like this, if she didn't call, this would have been a recovery for many days.
Right. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So in a sense, she was being a lighthouse as well as you guys. It takes both aspects to make this a success.
Right. She started the whole emergency process by calling it in and giving it a decent location. And we put our resources on land and interviewed her. Where did she last see the boat? What location? We couldn't see the debris until we got close upon it. And in the drone footage, you see the drone got there just as the boats did. So we were able to identify that. And fortunately, that hose floated. They had literally the jackets and sweatshirts they were wearing that day. That was it. A great partnership between Scituate Fire, Scituate Police, Scituate Harbor Master, and the Marshfield Harbor Master as well was instrumental in assisting us in this rescue.
Well, a big thank you to you for being with me today, and just thank you so much for everything you and your fire department and fire departments like yours all over the country, everything you do for us every day. Again, we have the segment in this podcast called Be a Lighthouse, and lighthouses save lives, of course, and are symbols of hope in our communities, and the work that you do serves those same purposes every day, and we appreciate it so much. Thank you so much, Chief John Murphy, for being with me today.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
The motto of the old U.S. Life-Saving Service was, "You have to go out, but you don't have to come back," meaning that you had to go out to rescue anyone in need of assistance, even if it was at great personal risk to yourself. And of course, the motto of the Coast Guard is Semper Paratus, meaning always ready.
Firefighters are very much in that great tradition of first responders in times of danger and emergency. But like lighthouse keepers, they don't see themselves as heroic. Edward Croker, who was fire marshal for the Fire Department of New York, once said, quote, "When a man becomes a fireman, his greatest act of bravery has been accomplished. What he does after that is all in the line of work," unquote.
Check out uslhs.org to learn more about tours, the research catalog, the online shop, the passport program, and everything else the U.S. Lighthouse Society offers. Donations and memberships help to support this podcast.
A big thank you to the Society's members and volunteers, as well as to Executive Director Jeff Gales and the Board of Directors for their support of this podcast.
On next week's episode, we'll be returning to New York for a talk with Sarah Wasberg Johnson, Director of Exhibits and Outreach at the Hudson River Maritime Museum, which operates Rondout Lighthouse.
As always, thanks for listening and
keep a good light.